Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Nate Niblink. I'm the creator of Apples and Genos, originator of the Zero G draft strategy, and in this podcast, I'm going to go over the most puzzling players league wide as submitted by the Apples and Genos Discord server. Let's get it. Welcome on in, everyone. As I mentioned, it's time for some puzzling players. In the Apples and Genos Discord server, I put out this call every single week about midday on Monday, and I ask the good people of the Apples and Genos Discord server, who are the players who are giving you the most fits? Who are the players that you can't seem to figure out? Who are your puzzling players? And the people respond each and every week, and we create a list, and we go through them one by one until everybody's satisfied. All right. We've got people in the chat already. Keeper of the Goat says, I'm ready to be less puzzled. That is the aim. That is the end goal of what we're doing here. Jackson's in here. What's up, Nate? Are you ready to get to biz? You know how we do. That's what we're about to do. Let's start it off. Let's not waste any time. Pius Suter was by far the most requested player in the Discord server this week. We talked about him yesterday. If you haven't had a chance yet to catch Nate and Blake and I, myself, if you haven't had a chance to catch Blake and I's podcast, the flagship show from yesterday, then you should definitely go check that out. We did touch on Pius Suter. Basically, the point I want to make with Pius Suter is that this is the exact time to take a flyer on a player like this, because Vancouver has a great schedule. Not this particular week with these 3 days of games and very few games, only 6 total games across 3 days here before the All-Star break. But the following week after, Vancouver has a pretty solid schedule, one of the best schedules of any team. And so this is a good time to get in on Pius Suter. I mentioned in the waiver wire episode, which is the episode before last, that I had some concern that he might still just get bumped off that unit before the top power play unit, or even the top line before the next Vancouver game. The next game came since then, and he had power play points. Everything worked again for another game in a row, and so I just don't see any reason why they would go away from it. So you have to be betting on it a little bit, but it feels like a much safer bet now that it's worked really well again for another game. So overall, Pius Suter, last 5 games, actually last 3 games, he's got 6 points, including 4 goals. He's averaging over 17 minutes in these 5 games, but that's just continued to go up and up and up over the course of this. Over these 5 games, though, 3rd in the league in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. That's a great number. 15th in on ice scoring chances, 4 per 60. Another great number there. And definitely, playing in Vancouver, any exposure to JT Miller, Brock Besser, Quinn Hughes, all these guys, you are getting a ton, absolute ton of offensive chances, and you just really have to be available, and you can get in on some of that. On the season, obviously, Suter's numbers are not super impressive, although he is now on pace for 28 goals, which is pretty solid. 123rd in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60 is his best number on the season, which is pretty solid, but definitely you see he's shooting over 20% to get to that 28 goal pace so far. So all in all, I'm not saying that he can't sustain this, but I am preaching a little bit of caution with Pius Suter. This is a player that we've seen play in the league for multiple years now, and unless he's just completely leveling up at this point with some new line mates in the middle of the season, which would be odd for a number of reasons, then he's probably most likely just a player who's on a hot streak, and that can be a good thing to grab as a streamer, but that's what makes this potential ad so useful. He's hot right now. You go out, you get him. He's going to get that deployment for, at the very least, the first game. We feel pretty confident now. And you could just kind of take it from there, one game at a time. And if he goes to 0, if he stops performing, if the scoring chances go away, if he gets moved down the lineup, you just drop him because you didn't have to waste anything other than an ad to get him on your team in the first place. But if he does turn into something, then this is a great time to pick him up because you're going to be able to take advantage of that great streaming schedule. You're not giving up your streamer spot or a good streaming schedule from another player to be able to add Pius Suter. You're kind of getting the best of both worlds. So this is exactly the time that I like to take a stab at a player like Pius Suter who's getting this increased deployment. All right, back in the comments, Blister Boy says, good morning from abroad, Nate. Good morning to you, sir. And Toronto Dave's in here. Appreciate you, TD, chiming in with hashtag 0G as always. All right, let's keep rolling. Let's talk about Tage Thompson. This is also a player that Blake and I touched on yesterday. Just 1 assist in his last 5 games here, averaging over 18 minutes a night. I made the point that, 18 minutes is good, but it's not like superstar level deployment. And that's been one of the things about Thompson is that he's never been given that superstar level deployment yet. He performed like a superstar last year without that, but he hasn't really been given the keys to the city yet, as it were. So one thing that we did note yesterday that's pretty odd, the 178th in the league in shots per 60 over the last 5 games, but 11th in shot attempts per 60. That's just very, very odd. It's very odd to see such a disparate number between those two. Usually they're very aligned. There's some difference for sure from one to the other, but definitely they're mostly aligned 99% of the time. So that's pretty odd, and I really don't know what to make of that other than to say it's most likely just variance, and he just happened to miss the net a bunch of times in the past 5 games here, and that's likely to correct, and basically those shots per 60 and those scoring chances should come up as a result of him hitting the net a bit more often. On the season, Tage's numbers are down. Like if you look at even relative to previous seasons, his underlying numbers, like don't get me wrong, his numbers are good. 32nd in shots per 60, 19th in shot attempts per 60, 125th in individual scoring chances for per 60 is where he's down the most from last year. And that's the most concerning, I guess, part about Tage Thompson this year. Still on pace for 30 goals, 59 points. It's just not what you signed up for when you spent a high pick on Tage Thompson this year, as I did in Kikuffle. So I'm right there with you. I mentioned this yesterday. Buffalo does have a really, really good playoff schedule, especially if your playoffs are in weeks 23 through 25. They're one of the better teams for the playoff schedule there. And so you're probably going to want to hang on to Tage Thompson if you have him. You might even want to consider acquiring him because we do know that the ceiling of this player is just so high, right? We know that this is a player who can pop off for big numbers. It hasn't happened so far this year, but that does not mean that it will not happen ever again just because it hasn't happened so far. Obviously, he's dealt with injury at times as well throughout the season. There's been a number of factors that have gone on here. Just looking back versus his previous 2 seasons here, right? Just to do a little bit of a comparison, want to see what we can glean from this. So in 2021-22, in 78 games, he had 68 points, including 38 goals. Last year, 22-23, again, 78 games, but he scored 47 goals and 94 points. And then this year, as I mentioned, he's on a 30-goal, 59-point pace through 39 games played so far. This IPP of 67% that he's got would be the lowest of the past couple of years, but not by much. He's actually been pretty consistent. The high water mark last year, 74%. The low water mark this year being 67%. Nothing really seems out of the ordinary on the whole here. The shots per 60, 10.84 this season, 12.2 last year, and 10.88 the season before. So yeah, in the right range. Might even have a little bit of room to bump up there. Shot attempts, right in line with previous years. The scoring chances are what's really come down. 8.99 individual scoring chances for per 60 versus 12.4 last year, 9.6 the year before that. That's the concerning part in my mind with Tage Thompson. The on-ice stats still look very similar in terms of the Corsi 4 per 60 to last year. The on-ice scoring chances for per 60 have dipped this year, and a lot of that is probably due to him, due to the dip in individual scoring chances for there. The on-ice shooting percentage has also dipped in a huge way. Last year, he had a 13.1% on-ice shooting percentage, probably a bit high, and probably should have expected maybe some more regression there. But the season before, he had a 12% on-ice shooting percentage, so it's not like this isn't a player who hasn't sustained a high on-ice shooting percentage before, and I think it's one that we should anticipate could do so again. Really, it's just a case of not only Tage, but also players around him, not converting at the rate that they had in the past. And so overall, I really don't know that I'm I I'm not convinced that Tage is going to have a massive breakout from here on out, and just go like right back to where he was last year, 94-point pace, 47 goal pace. I don't know if that's in the cards for the rest of the season, but I do anticipate it will get better at some point, as long as there's no underlying injury or any other concern that we're just not 100% aware of at this point. So that's my take on Tage. He's a risky play, but he is a potential buy at this point if you're trying to optimize your playoff schedule. And that is a good point as well. If you look ahead and you've got one of the teams that has a really bad playoff schedule, and you can change that into Tage Thompson, who will get into more games for you, will play better games for you, then you can kind of prorate the points that he's going to score, right, versus the one less game or two less games from whoever is currently in your lineup versus Tage, who might get those extra games because of the great schedule for those weeks. Hopefully that made sense. That came out a bit convoluted, but we're trying our best here. All right. Let's get back into the comments. They're absolutely popping off. Michael's in the chat. Is Hyman a sell high, or is he going to continue on his pace? So let's throw Zach Hyman in the sheet here. Zach Hyman has obviously had a terrific season so far. 56 goal, 88-point pace on the season. The underlying numbers on the season are also terrific. The 18.4% shooting percentage is definitely an outlier, and that definitely will decrease, but I don't really disbelieve the 88-point pace personally. 53% IPP, like that's definitely not super high. The 14.2% on ice shooting percentage is high, but it's Edmonton. They kind of do that thing. And so overall, I think that Hyman is probably just going to end up scoring less goals, but probably about the same point pace from here on out. That would be my anticipation at this point. So maybe it's like a 40 goal pace from here on out, but still like the 88 points. I feel like that's right in the wheelhouse for Zach Hyman. Bravin says the GOAT is back, hashtag 0G. I don't know who you're talking about, but if it's me, I'll take the compliment, my friend. Ricky is in the chat saying, long term for the rest of the season, in a Cats league, are you higher on Vilardi or Troy Terry? One has to go when Jack Hughes is back. It's a good question. It's not one I have an obvious and easy answer to. I'm interested in both players. I think both players will have good rest of season numbers. So it's not like I have a clear favorite here by any stretch of the imagination. Neither player is really, contributing in hits or anything like that. If your league has that, it's really just about point potential in a lot of these cases. I think that this is the thing. I think that Troy Terry is a better player, as more talented, is better at scoring points. I think Gabe Vilardi is in a far superior situation, and so that's kind of the two ends of the stick, or ends of the seesaw, I guess, that you're looking at here. Which do you weigh more, and which moves the scales for you personally? For myself, I usually tend to default to player talent. It seems to win out more often than not in my experience, and so I think I would take Troy Terry just on like a pure points basis. If you have like plus minus in your Cats league, then I think definitely you probably have to go Vilardi, because Troy Terry is never going to have a good plus minus in Anaheim. So that could be a decision maker for you if that is the case in your league. So depending on the Cats, for sure, it's close enough that it does depend on exactly which categories that you do have, but that would be my take on that. Jordan says, hey Nate, what are your thoughts on Charlie Coyle, and is he a rest of season hold? I don't think that Charlie Coyle is necessarily a rest of season hold. I think he could be a rest of season hold, but definitely not necessarily. He's got 8 points, 3 goals in his last 5, absolutely popping off. The underlying stats still do not look good. They have never looked good at any point throughout this season, but he's been getting some sweet deployment over there in Boston. which has really just elevated him to heights that we haven't seen from him so far. I will note that in the last game, it was a Coyle, Marchand, Trent Frederic line, which is a new look for the Boston Bruins. And they did also switch up the power play units, and Coyle came off the top power play, and Zacha went back up there. So, with that being the case, that's a tough spot for Coyle to continue to produce. I think I'm probably just hanging on to Coyle as long as he continues to produce. And then if I get, 2, 3, 4 games where he's not producing anymore, then I'll be happy to let go of Coyle at that point. I do not think that you have to beat yourself up over Charlie Coyle. I think he's had a terrific run to this point. I think it's unlikely that it continues as well as it has so far. Smelvin is the chat. Faber or Sanderson? Sanderson gets me 2 more playoff games. That is pretty interesting. If you could tell me for sure that Sanderson keeps the top power play in Ottawa for the rest of the season, I would say Sanderson. Because you cannot tell me that for sure, it is a much, much more difficult situation. I tend to lead to Faber. I think that the floor there is much higher. I think you're not going to be disappointed with Faber. And realistically, there's a pretty good chance that Faber equals Sanderson even with those 2 less games. But yeah, if Sanderson was guaranteed power play 1, then I might lean that way. I could see that. All right, let's move on. Blister Boy asks, any thoughts on Tuch? So it's interesting, talking about Tage Thompson. Obviously, Alex Tuch is another member of that situation, and things just haven't really worked out for Alex Tuch so far this year in much the same way that they haven't worked out for Tage Thompson. So let me put Alex Tuch in the sheet down here, and we'll see what it comes out with. He's got 2 goals, 4 points in his last 5. That's not too bad. Just over 19 minutes a night. 165th in shots per 60, 104 in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, 82nd in on-ice Corsi, 4 per 60, 100th exactly in scoring chances, 4 per 60. On the season, pacing for 27 goals, 66 points, still averaging 19 minutes on the season. That kind of doesn't feel that far off of Alex Tuch. Like, I do wonder if we're going to look at last season, and when all is said and done, and see that 74 games played with a 79 points in those 74 games played, and view that as kind of the high watermark of Alex Tuch's entire career. I think that's entirely possible. This year, what's more concerning is the shots are down. 9.2 last year, 8.0 this year. Individual scoring chances for are down as well, but more slightly from 9.1 to 8.8. On ice numbers looking very similar to Tage Thompson. I mean, these guys play in a lot of the same situations, so it makes sense that they would mirror each other fairly closely there. I think his shooting percentage is probably in line. I think his IPP is probably in line. Maybe he's getting a little bit unlucky with the on-ice shooting percentage in the same way that Tage Thompson is, although not to the same extent. So maybe you're talking, instead of 66 points, maybe you're talking like 70 points. 30 goals, 70 points. Maybe that's what we should expect from Alex Tuch rest of season, but I don't think that we're far off from the actual player that Alex Tuch is at this point. So I would not, just go nuts trying to acquire Alex Tuch thinking that he's going to get back to that point per game plus pace of last year. Aman says, hey Nate, hello, good to have you with us. Adam is in the chat. I have a somewhat pressing goalie decision that I could use help with. 11-team Roto Cats League. Have Decord, Thompson, and Demko plus Hill on IR. My league has a strict rule. You can only have 3 active goalies. I'm allowed to have Hill languishing on my IR, but it prevents me from making any other adds or trades. I think Decord is greater than Thompson rest of season, but do I really go up the handcuff? Who would you drop? Wins, save percentage, goals against, average, and shutouts. That is an interesting one. So the goalies again are Decord, Thompson, and Demko. Obviously, Demko you're hanging on to. Decord has been so good lately that it's really hard to move off him. And then you're left with Thompson and Hill. I honestly, I'd be looking for who I think the 1A in Vegas is, and then I'd probably just take that. I am very ambivalent towards goalies, as you probably know if you've been watching any Apples and Ginos content for any length of time. I just view goalies as very replaceable, and if you choose the wrong one between Thompson and Hill, it will not destroy your entire season, in my opinion. You'll be able to find somebody else who can fill that need for you. So I would not be too scared. I would make the move whenever you feel you have enough information to say, I think this is the time. I think, Hill is the starter moving forward, or at least the 1A, I guess I should say. They're more likely to go, 1A, 1B, so on and so forth. Hill did get 2 starts in a row. There was a back-to-back as part of that, so that muddies the waters a little bit. I if I had to choose right now, I would choose Hill personally. He's played better this season. I would go with Aiden Hill, and he's played well since coming back. So, yeah, if you're making a decision to do something about it right now, I would go with Aiden Hill. I would drop Logan Thompson. Personally, I don't think there's value in holding a handcuff, and in fact, I think it's probably not good for you overall. So that's my take on that. Pravin asks, is Brock Nelson losing steam? Been solid this year with very strong underlying stats. Last 10 games, he's both slowed down and fell down the underlying stats chart. We are going to get to Brock Nelson rather. So hang on to your hats for that one. And Amon is asking, when do playoffs start in most leagues? Depends. So if you're going by the Yahoo schedules, there's basically two major versions of this: weeks 23 to 25 or weeks 24 to 26. I believe, if I remember correctly, I believe the Yahoo default is weeks 24 to 26, which goes right to the very end of the NHL season. I prefer to play in leagues, and all my leagues that I commission stop whatever. Basically, it excludes the last matchup of the Yahoo year, so that matchup week 26 is removed, and I use 23 through 25. So it does depend. You can check it out in your league settings. If you go to league and then settings, you should be able to find it, and it should tell you which weeks are your playoff weeks there. All right. Let's keep rolling. We've only gotten through 2 players so far. The chat's been absolutely popping. You love to see it, but we got to get through some players too. So let's do that. Wyatt Johnston was highly requested. 2 goals, 6 points in his last 5, averaging 17.5 minutes a night. 30th in shots per 60, 5th in individual scoring chances for per 60, 24th in Corsi for per 60, 19th in scoring chances for per 60. Wyatt Johnston, I've been a fan of this player for a while. You heard me, if you've been around since last season, you heard me talking about him last season and how he was really showing up well under the hood in his rookie year. Now this year he's getting even more opportunity, and he's absolutely killing it. 23 goal, 54 point pace on the season. That's with spending a lot of the season so far languishing on the third line. Now that he's getting a bit more ice time, getting a chance to show what he can do, I honestly think the sky's the limit for this player. Like, I think it's not out of the realm of possibility to think that he could surpass Roope Hintz as a superior player and superior center for the Dallas Stars as soon as next year. So I'm really in on this player. 43rd in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, down a little bit in the shots per 60, 156th there. That could just be a little bit of the factor of the team around him not being that good for most of the season. Now that he's getting to play up the lineup with better players, and that might creep up and might continue to improve. But it also might just be that Wyatt Johnston is a little bit more of that Braden Point style player who doesn't take a ton of shots, but when he does take shots, they're very dangerous shots from dangerous areas. So overall, I'm really in on Wyatt Johnston. I think this pace, 23 goal, 54 point pace, is super sustainable. Definitely, it'd be a little bit of a stretch to say that he's absolutely going to sustain 6 points in every 5 games from now on, but it's not impossible if he does keep up deployment up with a lot of those top players there in Dallas. That I think is within the range of outcomes for sure. In their last game that Dallas played against Washington, the Hintz, Robertson, Wyatt Johnston line had 12 shots between the 3 of them and 0 shots against. They had 21 Corsi for and only 4 Corsi against for an 84% Corsi for percentage. That is ridiculous stuff from that top line, and so I don't see any reason for them to move away from it anytime soon. Johnston is a hold until further notice at this point in my mind. FF Tyler, oh, good to see you, buddy. Is Grant Fuhr a good 0G target? Absolutely. The best 0G target. Probably will give up about 5 goals a game, but he's going to get those W's for you as long as Gretzky keeps filling the net there. All right, let's talk about some Edmonton Oilers, though. Let's talk about Evan Bouchard. Again, this is another player that Blake and I did mention in the flagship show yesterday, so you can check out our takes there. But 1 assist in his last 5 games. The underlying stats being really far down here is what's the most curious for Bouchard. He's been a shot and scoring chance producing monster basically throughout his career. Like, honestly, since he stepped into the league, he's done that. But just 156th amongst all defensemen shots per 60 and 138th in individual scoring chances for per 60. Those are terrible numbers. That's like legitimately bottom of the pool numbers, which is just really shocking for Evan Bouchard to do this at any 5-game stretch throughout the season. The on-ice numbers still look solid because he does play for Edmonton. He plays on the top power play there. Of course, they're going to look pretty solid. But you can see on the season, like, his underlying numbers have been terrific. 11th in shots per 60, 34th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60, 6th in on-ice scoring in on-ice Corsi, 4 per 60, and 1st in on-ice scoring chances, 4 per 60 on the season. On the season, he's pacing for 20 goals, 78 points. There's a chance that comes down a little bit. He might be running a little bit hot, especially in terms of the shooting percentage at 9.1%. But overall, I'm still very in on Evan Bouchard. I don't think this is more than most likely just kind of a cold stretch for him. But I will also say that I'm watching this. Like, this is odd enough that I'm watching to see if there's going to be a reason that comes out about this, whether it be injury or the coach asking him to do something different, a different play style, whatever the case may be. I am watching this to see if this trend continues. If it continues, if it's 10 games and we're still looking at him not being able to produce shots for us, then that's going to be much more concerning at that point in my mind. Jackson S., who's a better option to use my second-round pick for, Hyman, Besser, or Verhaeghe? Goals, assists, points, power play points, shots on goals, hits, and blocks. At this point, I think you got to go with Zach Hyman. All good options, good players, but Hyman has done it a couple years in a row now there, having another terrific season, going to get power play points, he's going to give you shots, he's going to do some hitting, he's going to do a little bit of all those things. I think he's a pretty solid option in those categories. Jordan asks, I'm curious if Trent Frederic is a rest of season hold. Trent Frederic is also on the list, so we are coming to that name as well. Before we get there, though, I do have to talk about some goalies. David Rittich and Cam Talbot over there in Los Angeles. What is going on in Los Angeles? It has been one of the biggest falls from grace that I can remember in quite some time. How hot they were at the beginning of the season, and the underlying metrics were terrific. Like, it wasn't just that they were hot, but the underlying metrics supported it, that LA was, in fact, a wagon. They were actually, just crushing teams. And for them to have just completely fallen off the map in the way that they have basically since the new year, since after the Christmas break, is just basically unprecedented in my mind. And it's a little bit hard to figure out exactly where they're going wrong. I know there's talk of how bad the room is and things like that. I mean, they're still at 5v5, they're still 5th in the league in Corsi for percentage over the last 2 weeks. So that's been there. They are, let me check this one, they are 7th in the league in scoring chance for percentage at 5v5 over the last 2 weeks as well. So it's not as if the team is, just getting dummied out there at 5v5 and they just can't hang with teams anymore. It still seems like the level of play is there, but they're obviously not converting as much. Their PDO is .936 through this stretch, which is truly horrific, and actually only Philadelphia's worse through the stretch. So they're 31st in the league in PDO in the last 14 days. That's not going to help matters at all. And so what does that mean for the goaltending position? We had Rittich come in here. He had a few good games in a row, and has most recently given up 4 goals on 32 shots to St. Louis in that OT loss on Sunday. Basically, the problem for the Kings is that they cannot play Cam Talbot at this point. He has been just horrific basically for over a month at this point. I do not think they can go back to Talbot anytime soon. It's like Ilya Samsonov levels of need to send you to the AHL to like just take a mental break and get yourself back together and then come back when you're okay again. That's what it's feeling like. You know, they ran him pretty hard. They started him basically every game for a long time, and maybe it just finally took a toll. He's not a spring chicken anymore, Cam Talbot. So maybe it finally took a toll there, and that's what we're seeing here. But regardless, I'm dropping Cam Talbot. If you haven't already, I think you should have. There's no goalie that's worth hurting your team to hang on to, and Cam Talbot is definitely hurting your team right now. I do expect that Riddick will get the majority of the starts moving forward until such a time as they might go out and add somebody new, which I do think is a very real possibility. They did it last year. They went out and got Eunice Corpusalo. This year, I do think it's a real possibility. As long as the team starts to show signs of turning things around, as long as they're not just somehow looking at this as a lost season, which seems impossible to say after the start that they had. But as long as that's not in the cards, I do think that at some point the Kings will probably be looking for goaltending help, assuming that somebody doesn't just absolutely take the reins once again here in LA and kind of start leading the team back to the promised land again, as it were. So that's my take right now. Riddick, I definitely am interested in. I would grab and hold at this point. Talbot should definitely be dropped. Let's keep rolling. Let's talk about Nick Schmaltz. Nick Schmaltz, just one assist. Last 3 games that he's gotten into. 17 minutes average time on ice, which is concerning. That's not where Nick Schmaltz usually lives. The last few years, he's definitely gotten far more ice time than that, and that's really been a key component. I mean, it's a key component of any player's ability to put up production is how much time they're spending on the ice, for sure. Don't want to undercut that by any means, but like last year, 19 minutes, 42 seconds average time on ice. So if this latest trend of 17 minutes is going to stick around, then that's really going to hurt his ability to produce. 120th in shots per 60, 61st in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60 through this stretch. Those are actually pretty good numbers. Nick Schmaltz has always been more of an efficiency guy than a guy who puts up big rate stats. On the season, pacer for 24 goals, 53 points. I do think that there's some room for him to outperform this, to specifically get better on the IPP. Last 2 years, 71.6%, 74.7%. This year just at 60.4%. So I do think that there's definitely that 10% that he could pop up there, and that would put him right back into the conversation, 70-ish points once again. So I do think that that's still a very real possibility. One thing I will say, if you're looking past the All-Star break and the kind of 2-week matchup that we have currently ongoing that comprises this week and next, if you look beyond that, then there's a really terrible streaming week after that, and Arizona is basically the only team that has a streaming schedule that's any good. They have 4 games, all 4 on off nights, so they're a priority stream team for that matchup. And so if Nick Schmaltz is hanging out there on your waiver wire and you can afford to, it may be a good idea to snatch him up early here and keep him around for that streamer week, just because, Arizona streamers are going to be really hard to come by for that week in particular. Pravin asks, Matt Duchene is interesting, doesn't blow up the underlying stat sheet, but a consistent point scorer in the league. Does this mean he's due to regress, or is this just his play style? So in general, what I would say is that some players do have a play style where they're just more efficient than others. Partially, you could say that's a reflection of just their talent level, but also I think like generating a bunch of chances is also an indication of talent level as well. So I don't want to discount that either. Having said that, Duchene on the season, 72.6% IPP. The last couple of years, he's not approached that. Obviously, he's in Dallas. He's in a new situation, so maybe you could say that that plays into it a little bit. But the IPP does feel high here. The shooting percentage is high-ish at 16.7%, but he has had a few seasons. He's got a 17.4% season, a 21% season, an 18.8% season. He also has some, 8.7% seasons, 8.5% seasons. He's been all over the map in terms of his shooting percentage. So it's a little bit hard to say what he should or shouldn't be at in terms of that shooting percentage, but yeah, that could regress a little bit. And then the on ice shooting percentage is definitely going to regress rest of season, 15.1%. That is astronomical. So that will definitely regress and that will definitely hurt Matt Duchene. I do think that the most likely scenario for the rest of the season is a pretty solid regression for Matt Duchene and that he returns to more of a streamer status. Jackson asks Urson or UPL rest of season. It's an interesting question. Urson, obviously, with Carter Hart out of the picture, at least for the time being, looks to be the presumptive starter. Whereas with Luukkonen, you're not really sure if he's just getting a good run here or if he is kind of locking down a starting role for the rest of the season. What I will say is that UPL is playing better at the moment. And I'm kind of into that. So I think I would roll with UPL rest of season there, but I think it's fair to talk about them in the same sentence. Dan says that Hurdle Turtle stream not looking too hot for tomorrow with the day-to-day status. Should I replace with Couture? I would wait as long as possible to make that move. If you don't think you can wait and you have to make the move now or someone else is going to beat you to it, would I make the move now? Honestly, probably not. Logan Couture has not been great since returning. The minutes have not been there, and he's not looked very good in the underlying stats in the 3 games back so far, so I don't think I would. I would actually probably prefer Fabian Zetterlund right now to Logan Couture. After diving into those numbers, they do look pretty bad. The time on ice is really concerning. That it doesn't seem like they feel like they can give him a lot of time on ice, that they're really easing him back into things. Maybe it'll be a different story after the All-Star break, but that obviously doesn't help you for the here and now. All right. Let's get back into these players. Artturi Lehkonen is an interesting one. Obviously, returning from injuries, played a couple games now, doesn't have any points, skated over 16 minutes a night, but has not found his way back onto the top power play unit where he did a bunch of damage last year, or the top line, which is still occupied by Jonathan Drouin at this moment. I will say that Drouin is definitely not a player that I think is going to hang on to this role forever, and Lehkonen is more likely than not going to get that role at some point in, probably the next month at the very least. Jared Bednar does move the lines around when things are not working. Whenever the team has a game or two that he doesn't like how they're playing, he does shuffle the lineup fairly regularly. And so I do anticipate that Lehkonen will get back up there at some point and could probably have an extended run on that line the way that Drouin has so far. Overall, I had a spot where I was considering dropping Lehkonen, and I ended up doing it. I was against an opponent who was higher than me in the standings and felt like I had to be a little bit ruthless for the week. And so I did drop Lehkonen for a 2-game stream for before the All-Star break. I might still try to add Lehkonen back if he's not picked up before then, because Colorado does have a good schedule after the All-Star break. So that can be an option. If you have Lehkonen, you're probably just holding him in most spots unless you really need to stream somebody for this week and Lehkonen is the bottom of your lineup. Then maybe you can try to do something similar to what I'm doing and try to drop him for right now. Grab your San Jose player, whoever it may be, and then try to grab Lehkonen back after that for Colorado's great schedule the following week. So that is definitely an option. I'm not reading too much into Lehkonen's underlying stats after just 2 games back from a long-term injury. We'll see how it equalizes over time, but I do think that this is a player who at some point will be very fantasy relevant. I'm just not sure exactly when that will be, and I don't want to just roster a player because he should get better, at some indefinite point in the future. Jared McCann, 3 goals, 7 points in his last 5. Had a big game yesterday as well against Columbus. Just over 15.5 average time on ice. 80th in shots per 60, but 229th in individual scoring chances, 4 per 60. On ice numbers are solid. 89th in Corsi, 4 per 60. 64th in scoring chances, 4 per 60. On the season now, pacing for 34 goals, 60 points, 16.5 minutes average time on ice. He's doing all that with a 76% IPP, 16.5% shooting percentage, and 10.8% on ice shooting percentage. This kind of feels like where McCann should live. We know that in Seattle, they're never going to give one player just all the minutes. They might do it for a stretch of games while a player's hot, but it's always going to kind of equalize over the course of this season. I'm just looking back at the past couple of seasons in Seattle. The IPP at 76% feels high, but he has had a season prior to this where he was up over 80%, and then last season was at 69%, which is pretty nice. So I don't think that 76 is like way too high, but it is on the high side of things. The individual scoring chances for per 60 are actually higher than last year, so that's a nice feather in his cap. The on-ice numbers looking pretty solid, pretty similar to last year. The on-ice shooting percentage at 13.4% last year was probably the unsustainable part of what he was able to produce last year. 10.75% so far this year. That feels much more in line with where he will likely be the rest of the season. And so I'm probably thinking that Jared McCann at this pace, 60 to 65 points. That feels pretty reasonable, I would say, at this point. And then, somewhere around this 30 to 35 goal mark as well. So I think this feels pretty reasonable for Jared McCann. Should be in this range, maybe just a touch above a streamer level player rest of season. Let's move on. Gabriel Vilardi, 1 goal in his last 3 games here that he's gotten into, 18 minutes average time on ice. Underlying metrics, not so hot, but on the season, they've actually been quite good, and especially the individual scoring chances for per 60 at 21st in the league on the season, pacing for 33 goals and 61 points over an 82-game schedule. 56% IPP, 15.5% shooting percentage. 11.7% on ice shooting percentage. I kind of feel like this is exactly the pace that Gabe Vilardi will be on for the rest of the season. 33 goals, 61 points. He's getting a lot of deployment, getting top line minutes, top power play usage. This kind of just feels where Gabe Vilardi is going to live for the rest of the season. I don't know that this is a player who's like the single most talented player, but feels a little bit like a budget Zach Hyman situation in some ways. I think I could see a similar role for Gabe Vilardi and a role that he could probably excel in. So 30 goals, 60 points, that feels like a solid projection for Gabe Vilardi moving forward for me. Brock Nelson, who is mentioned in the Discord and also in the comments here tonight, 2 goals, 3 points his last 5, averaging over 18 minutes a night, 38th in shots per 60, 20th in individual scoring chances for per 60, 16th in Corsi for per 60, 10th in scoring chances for per 60. All those underlying numbers the last little bit look terrific. On the season, he's 9th in the league in individual scoring chances for per 60. Hasn't quite materialized into a ton of points for Brock Nelson so far. He's on pace for 35 goals and 64 points, which is fine. But I projected him for more than that. I thought that he was definitely going to be doing something maybe more akin with what he was able to do towards the end of last year. You look at the IPP here, 66%. Last couple of years, 71%, 69%, so maybe he's got a touch more room to give there. Really, it's the shooting percentage that feels like it should tick up for Brock Nelson, especially given the incredible amount of scoring chances that he's generating. It feels like, 2 seasons ago, he shot 21.6%. Last season, 16.2%. Now this season, just 13.5%. I feel like Brock Nelson should regress upwards and be at least in that 15-16 range, if not a little bit higher overall. 12.77 individual scoring chances for per 60 this year for Brock Nelson, which is truly remarkable. That's elite level scoring chance generation. The on-ice numbers look terrific, even better than last year. On-ice shooting percentage is a little bit down, which is really just probably based on his shooting percentage being a little bit down. So overall, I'm still in on Brock Nelson. I actually think he's got some room to give. I think he could get to a 40-goal, 70-point pace rest of season, and that would be pretty comfortable. Pretty in on Brock Nelson. Don't have much to add there. Evgeny Malkin is next up here. He's got 1 goal, but 4 assists for 5 points in his last 5 here. And 128th in shots per 60, 172nd in individual scoring chances for per 60, 78th in Corsi for per 60, 132nd in on-ice scoring chances for per 60 is Evgeny Malkin. What's worrying me at the moment is that Malkin was taken off the top power play and shuffled around to a different unit with Jeff Carter, Lars Eller, Ricard Raquel. That is not the guys you want to be out there on the power play with if you're Evgeny Malkin. I don't think that this experiment will last a long time, but it is still not a great development that this is even within the realm of possibility for Evgeny Malkin. On the season, pacing for 29 goals, 71 points. Feels pretty in line with what Malkin does on a consistent basis. I don't see much reason to anticipate. Yeah, I feel like 29 goals, 71 points, that feels about right for Malkin at this stage in his career. He's done some similar things in years past. The IPP is right in line. The shooting percentage is right in line. The on-ice shooting percentage is maybe a touch low, but not too much lower than we would expect. So all in all, yeah, I feel like 30 goals, 70 to 75 points, that's where Malkin should be. But I am watching this latest development that he's taken off the top power play. Hopefully that resolves quickly and we don't have to be more worried. But if it does continue to drag out, then Malkin would obviously lose a significant chunk of his efficacy for our leagues here. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about Timo Meier. 2 assists in his last 5 games here, averaging close to 18 minutes a night, which is good, much better than earlier in the season. 58th in shots per 60, 128th in individual scoring chances for per 60, 137 in Corsi 4 per 60, 99th in scoring chances for per 60. On the season, pacing for just 22 goals and 43 points. I mean, I feel like there's got to be better days ahead for Timo Meier, but I keep saying that and it keeps not happening. Yeah, I think this is probably a player who needs these minutes, but also needs a little bit more around him to produce. I don't think that Nico Hischier is necessarily a player who elevates players around him. And Meier has, like, in the last game he played with Lazar and Nathan Bastian. No, he's not going to score points in that kind of deployment. Even if he's on the top power play, it's going to be really hard for him to score meaningful points while getting that kind of even strength deployment. So that's just really tough to swallow if you're a Timo Meier manager. I am kind of viewing Meier as a borderline streamer level player. I'm waiting to see what happens when Jack Hughes gets back. If he can get with Jack Hughes, get on a bit of a heater, then maybe we get something more out of Meier. But it is really hard to hang on to Timo Meier when stuff like this just keeps happening to him. Michael asks, is Nick the new podcast guy a drop in reference to the last podcast? Yeah. I think we're definitely dropping Nick, unfortunately. Jordan asks, I'm new to fantasy, so I'm wondering if managers look into their goalies' playoff matchup strengths / opponents' goals for and look to trade for goalies with favorable matchups. You definitely can. That's not a bad strategy. It's a better strategy than trying to predict which goalies are playing really well at any given strength at any given moment. I'd rather be looking at opponents and their tendencies, and obviously that goalie's team and their tendencies, their ability to play defense and not allow a lot of scoring chances against is obviously a big thing as well. Definitely, I think that's a solid strategy if you are looking to move your goalies around and find something. In general, I'm not trying to trade for goalies. I think that you're probably in some 90+% of the cases better off investing your time and energy trying to improve your skater core and basically spending your waiver wire energy on trying to find better goaltenders that way. So that's the way that I will continue to preach the Zero G gospel, as it were. That's the way I would play it personally. All right, Seth Jarvis, 5 assists, no goals in his last 5 games, over 18 minutes. He's been a consistent minute hog this year for Carolina, which is really nice to see in the RBA world over there. 109th in shots per 60, 49th in individual scoring chances for per 60, 38th in Corsi for per 60, 44th in scoring chances for per 60 over those 5 games. On pace for 26 goals, 65 points. And just a 55% IPP, which is a little bit curious for Seth Jarvis. I think that he might even have some room to grow on that IPP and give us even a little bit more juice, which would obviously be nice for us fantasy managers. He's doing some hitting. He's doing a little bit of everything and contributing across basically all categories if you're in a categories league, but I do think that he has some room to give there in terms of that IPP as he continues to grow. The shooting percentage, probably about in line, just taking a look at where his shots per 60 versus his individual scoring chances for per 60 kind of line up. Maybe he even has a little bit more shooting percentage to give, to be quite honest with you. I kind of feel like this is the player that Seth Jarvis is a little bit. Maybe he's got a little bit more to give on the IPP, maybe a little bit more on the shooting percentage, but most likely this is about the range that we should expect for Seth Jarvis moving forward. Pravin asks, I just traded Jarvis away for Trevor Moore last week because I wanted more goal scoring than Jarvis. Now I see that he's surpassing Moore in individual scoring chances for, and I'm kicking myself. I feel like it's not a bad bet to bet on Trevor Moore. He's been doing lots of good stuff himself lately. It's just not showing up necessarily in the score sheet. Early on this season, he was outperforming very, very handily his underlying numbers, and so this is probably just some regression coming back for him. But I do think that, I think that trade is fine. I don't think it's going to make or break your season, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Jordan says, fully converting to 0G. Absolutely. We love to see it. Welcome. You'll never go back. Brady Tkachuk, 1 goal, 2 points in his last 5 games. Not great for Brady Tkachuk. 17 minutes plus change in average over the last 5 games. 44th in shot attempts per 60, but that's the best number there. The scoring chances not as good as they usually are. The shots are not as good as they usually are. On ice numbers are solid. 28th in Corsi 4 per 60, 34th in scoring chances 4 per 60. Those are good numbers. On the season, pacing for 36 goals, 69 points, which is not as nice as you might think. 4th in the league in shots per 60 and 11th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60 on the season. But he's had a hard time converting. The on-ice shooting percentage in particular feels pretty light at 8.9%. Feel like we should be able to get some more juice out of Brady Tkachuk in that realm specifically. So I do think that he gets back up into the 75 to 80 point pace range at some point here. But definitely it's not been the season that we all hoped for and expected from Brady Tkachuk so far. Kyle says Brady 2 points tonight, goal and assist. There you go. Well on his way. I haven't been checking the score while I've been doing this live here, so there you go. Brady Tkachuk already proving me right. Nico Hischier, 2 goals, 5 points, his last 5. Just under 19 minutes average time on ice. 209th in shots per 60, but 89th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60. 68th in Corsi 4 per 60, 33rd in scoring chances 4 per 60. Nico Hischier is a player, like I mentioned with Meyer, I don't know that Nico Hischier is a player that's going to really elevate players around him. 30 goal pace, 64 point pace on the season. 57% IPP feels light, but 17.8% shooting percentage feels maybe even a little aggressive. So overall, I think, Hischier is also another player who's missing Jack Hughes, obviously more so on the power play where they play together than at even strength. But definitely Hischier could benefit from some of that. If you look at his last 4 seasons here, the shots per 60 is what I want to look at specifically. 6.8, 6.8, 9.9 last year, and back to 6.6 this year. You look at it that way, and it really starts to look like last year was the outlier, where for whatever reason, however it was happening, he was just taking way more shots. And so that's what concerns me the most here, is that he's just kind of not that player that he was for one season. Everything was working right. He was feeling it. He was ripping shots all over, and he hasn't quite been able to recreate that this year. That being said, the on-ice numbers this year are actually the best of his career so far. The on-ice shooting percentage is right in line with last year. So it's really just up to him. He can improve the IPP a little bit. The shooting percentage probably comes down though, so you might get less than the 30 goal pace, but you might get more than the 64 point pace moving forward, would be my estimation. Trent Frederic, we made it here. 1 goal, 6 points in his last 5 games. As I mentioned, got onto a Coyle and Marchand line in the last game for the Boston Bruins. So that's obviously a little bit more fantasy friendly, averaging right around 15 minutes the last 5 games. 208th in shots per 60, 295th in individual scoring chances 4 per 60. The on-ice numbers are pretty bad. 343rd in Corsi 4 per 60, 270th in scoring chances 4 per 60. You look at these numbers on the season, And yeah, they're about right there. 23 goal, 48 point pace on the season, skating 13 minutes, over 13 and a half minutes on the season. 74% IPP, 19.4% shooting percentage, and 12.8% on ice shooting percentage on the season is Trent Frederic. Yeah, this feels like Tanner Jeannot to me a little bit. So, yeah, I think we all know how that turned out for Tampa Bay, but that's the vibe I'm getting from Trent Frederic right now. I'm not saying that there's not a scenario in which he might be able to improve things, playing with better players, getting more minutes, etc. But most likely he continues in this bottom six role that he's kind of crafted for himself, and he's effective there. But it does feel like a Tanner Jeannot situation where he has this one terrific season and then is probably never heard of again for fantasy purposes. All right. We've just about made it to the end here, but we've got one more question from my good friend Gagan. He's the one doing all the Apples and Geos TikTok stuff. You should definitely go check that out. So yeah, go check out him on the TikTok. He says, hello, old pal. Jamie Drysdale is finally on power play 1, but he has Cam York next to him. That power play ain't looking too hot. Either would you consider Drysdale a drop? Might be more worthwhile using his spot to stream. Basically, I agree with that take. You look at this, and Drysdale has really nice on-ice numbers, skating about 19.5 minutes a night in Philly so far. 7th in Corsi 4/60, 16th in scoring chances 4/60. So the on-ice numbers looking really solid, but not shooting. 143rd in shots per 60, 72nd in individual scoring chances 4/60. That's not a great spot for Drysdale in terms of individual shot and chance generation. And yeah, just splitting time. Not what you want to see, obviously, for a guy like Drysdale. He's got a 62% IPP, which is really high. Obviously, he's only played 18 games on the season so far, came back from big injury and then got traded. A lot of change this year for Jamie Drysdale, so it's hard to fault him for anything. We've seen Torts just rotate through power play 1 defensemen ad nauseum this year. And so even if Drysdale got the top power play, it would just be kind of a situation where, yeah, you'd want him for as long as he's there, but he's pretty likely to move off of it pretty soon afterwards. So overall, I think that you can be in on Drysdale when he's on power play 1, see if he catches fire there. I do think this is a talented player who's shown some flashes at times. And Philadelphia is actually a solid environment this year in terms of fantasy production if he's able to figure it out for himself individually. So you can definitely be in on Drysdale when he's getting deployment, when he's getting top power play. But in general, I don't view him as anything more than a streamer, really. All right. I think we made it, folks. We made it to the end of the list. Thanks to everybody who joined the chat tonight. It was absolutely popping off, and I love to see it. Love to answer everybody's questions and get to everybody in the chat. It's always fun to do these things live. But that's going to be all I've got for this episode. Hopefully it brought you some value, helped you get a little bit better at fantasy hockey today. All the advanced stats you heard today came from Natural Stat Trick, which is a terrific free resource. Many thanks to the band. They're there for supplying the music for this podcast. Be sure to check out their Spotify as well. And that's it, folks. Much love.